By the 6th and 7th centuries, the Eastern Mediterranean had entered a period of systemic decay. Humanity was caught in a steep downward trajectory as its once stable cultural and governmental systems collapsed into chaos. A striking historical paradox emerges during this era. The very communities entrusted with divine scripture, the people of the book, found themselves locked in the most violent theological and political cycles of the time. Rather than a stabilizing force, these scriptural institutions became the primary engines of societal fracture. Men of religion withdrew into monasteries to escape the political fallout, while the remnants of their faiths were weaponized by states and empires. To diagnose this systemic collapse, we must look outside those failing institutions. In the Quran, Surah al-Bayyinah, the clear evidence, functions as a precise diagnostic text aimed directly at this historical deadlock. The text uses a highly structured pedagogy. It establishes 4 exact historical and theological realities that methodically dismantle the corrupted religious paradigms of late antiquity. Grasping why these ancient societies failed is a strict prerequisite. We have to understand their collapse to define what actually constitutes an acceptable, functioning religion today. The first reality confronts the entrenched misguidance of the era. Verse 1 explicitly identifies both the polytheistic societies and scriptural communities as being in a state of disbelief. The verse states they were not to be separated. They were locked in a closed, stagnant loop of theological confusion and political compromise, unable to break their own momentum. The existing institutions had no internal mechanism to transform themselves away from this misguidance. Because the stagnation was total, they required a decisive external rupture. The Quran posits the only viable solution was a messenger acting as the Bayyinah, bringing a physical, uncorrupted scripture. The text specifies purified pages, completely stripped of human political tampering or institutional revisions. Most importantly, it is purified from shirk, the act of associating partners with the divine. Humanity's self-destructive loop could only be shattered by an intervention that possessed absolute purity and operated entirely outside the existing power structures of the 7th century. Verse 4 introduces a severe historical claim. The violent divisions, or ikhtilaf, didn't emerge from ignorance. They occurred exactly after the clear evidence had already been received. A common misconception assumes the wars of late antiquity were sparked by ambiguity in the scriptures themselves. The historical record shows the exact opposite. We can see this lethal intertwining of doctrine and state power in the early 7th century conflicts between Jewish and Christian factions. When the Sassanid Persian king Khosroes sent his armies into the Levant, Jewish fighters allied with the Persians. Together, they destroyed Christian churches across Jerusalem and executed the local Christian populations. Following his victory, the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius entered Jerusalem and enacted sweeping counter-massacres, annihilating Jewish communities across the region in retaliation. These brutal massacres were not merely spontaneous. The Christian monks and patriarchs issued formal legal decrees to Heraclius, justifying the slaughter to bypass his previous oaths of amnesty. This violence extended deep into intra-Christian schisms as well, where factions disputed the exact nature of Christ. This diagram illustrates the Byzantine state's attempt to force theological consensus in 631 CE. They mandated the monothelite doctrine, a top-down edict to strictly control Christological debates. When the Egyptian Copts resisted this mandate, the state responded with a ruthless, decade-long persecution. The historical accounts document atrocities over these doctrinal disputes. Men were tortured with burning torches until their fat flowed to the ground, or placed in sacks filled with sand and drowned in the sea. The ikhtilaf of late antiquity illustrates the second reality, that schisms are driven by power and personal desire, occurring exactly after the clear evidence has been established. Verse 5 cuts through the tangled, violently enforced dogmas of the 7th century, offering a contrast defined by its irreducible simplicity. This establishes the third truth. Religion, in its original form, is singular, simple, and entirely devoid of convoluted theological math. This architectural diagram maps the exact components of Din al-Qayyimah, the upright religion. It requires only 4 irreducible pillars. The first pillar is sincere worship, or Ikhlas, demanding pure inward intent directed exclusively to the Creator. The second is hunafa, the active, conscious inclination toward truth, and a firm rejection of polytheism in all its forms. The third is the establishment of Salah, the outward, physical orthodoxy that binds the believer to a daily discipline. And the fourth is giving Zakah, representing socio-economic justice and the mandatory circulation of wealth. Contrast this actionable baseline with the Byzantine theological labyrinths. True divine religion is engineered to be universally accessible to human beings, not designed as a mechanism for elite political control. Because the final message is comprehensively clear and simple, the fourth truth dictates that it creates an absolute bifurcation of humanity. Verses 6 and 7 establish these parameters, separating the ultimate outcomes into the worst and the best of creation. Surah al-Bayyinah, the worst of creatures, are defined as those who actively reject this simple clarity, despite having the explicit evidence laid out in front of them. Khayr al-Bariyyah, the best of creatures, achieve their status through a very exact condition: belief combined directly with righteous deeds. Passive affiliation holds zero weight. Being born into a Muslim land or uttering a verbal label is entirely invalid. Internal faith, iman, must be strictly translated into al-salihat, meaning concrete righteous action and rigorous adherence to divine law in the physical world. The text then reveals the psychological engine that drives this righteous action: khashiyah, a deep, reverent fear and awe of the Lord. Khashiyah acts as a relentless internal filter. It strips away all forms of riyah, the desire to perform for society or the state. It ensures that every action is performed purely for the Creator. The ego is entirely eliminated from the equation. Surah al-Bayyinah resolves the deadly deadlock of late antiquity. It removes the politically weaponized dogma of empires and replaces it with a universally accessible religion, powered exclusively by pure individual accountability to God.